Shields and his restoration on the V77. Many of us saw this yesterday at Stearman Field and the progress he's making. So without further ado, take it away, Randy.
All right. Well, thank you, Jody. So this is an artistic misconception of what the airplane may look like someday in the future. I did that in PowerPoint, and it's a black and gold paint scheme in honor of our alma mater of my wife and I. We both went to Purdue. So I've got my wife's name on the presentation here today, and as you guys know, doing restorations are not cheap, and they take both time and money. And so it's really good to make sure your spouse is totally on board with the activity, and in this case, she definitely is. So this isn't the first time we've restored an airplane. We restored a 108-2, and it's parked out here today if you want to take a closer look at it. It was a ground-up restoration over about 7.5 years. My A&P was also an IA, that's Wade Jones. And he was the real key to success in getting that finished. He's also helping me on the V77, so that's a good combination. If you want to see more about this restoration, there's a talk that I did in 2019 at the Stinson Summit, and it's available on the Stinson Tech channel on YouTube there, so check it out. So why restore a Gullwing is always a question people ask me. And I think you have to agree, it's a very beautiful airplane. Probably the only other one that I would really seek would be a Beech Stagger Wing. It's all metal airplane, much like the presentation we just had about the accident in Alaska. You know, having that all metal structure really is great for post-crash issues. So it's built like a tank. It's got a round engine, so that always sounds great. There's 5 seats in the airplane, and I'm told it's like riding in an old Packard. I've never been in a Packard, so I don't know, maybe, but it looks definitely comfortable. You get great parking at Oshkosh. When I built my hangar 10 years ago, I had always lusted after a Gullwing, so I thought, well, I'm going to make this big enough I can hold one just in case. And so I sized the hangar and the hangar door in order to get a Gullwing through. I mentioned the Stagger Wing a few minutes ago, can't afford one of those, and so I'm going with a Gullwing instead. And the most important reason, of course, is my wife said, okay. In fact, on this particular airplane, I had looked at it and I had second thoughts about it, and then over Thanksgiving we talked about it, and she pretty much insisted that you should go do that. So I did. So that's us at Oshkosh this past year. A keeper, for sure. A younger sister, yeah. So you have probably seen Gullwings before, but I have some stats here that kind of compares the two. What's interesting is that I'm comparing my 108 to the V77, and the empty weight of the Gullwing is going to be more than the max weight of my 108-2. So kind of makes you stop and realize just how big of an airplane you're dealing with. Of course, the wingspan is about 8 feet longer, and it's another 4 feet longer roughly in length. And then the height, it's almost 2 feet taller. And so you really need a ladder to get up into the cockpit. But fortunately, it comes built in, so not a problem. I've got the 180 horsepower Lycoming on my 108-2, and so I also have the Lycoming for the V77. It's a 300 horse versus 180. Comparison to fuel volume, it's almost double the fuel volume, and the fuel burn is probably going to be at least 50% more than what I'm currently doing. Now, I've never flown in a Gullwing before, so these performance stats, I just looked at a couple different articles and then kind of averaged them out, and that's what I've got in here. So it may burn more or less depending on what RPM you run, obviously. But that's kind of I don't know if you'd call it blind trust or what, but to really seek an airplane and go restore it, and you've never flown in one yet, is maybe crazy, right? Cruise speed, it's not going to be really any faster than the airplane I've got, even though I'm burning a lot more fuel.
I did try to keep up with the Gullwing ones, and I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
So they are a little bit faster.
A little bit faster. Good to know. Okay.
And you're making good sound. You're making good sound.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's worth style points, right? Yeah. Now, the last point on here is kind of an interesting one. The Voyager, that has an all-metal tail, and the flaps are metal. But on the V77, everything's fabric. So you've got a lot more surfaces that you've got to cover. And so just something to be prepared for. So this is the one that we've got. It's November 58285, which is a palindrome. You can say it forward or backwards, and it's the same. Most of the V77s were built as part of a Lend-Lease program that we had with Great Britain, and served over there and in other places around the world. Mine was manufactured in 1943 and went to St. Marin to be part of the British Royal Navy activity. It was FK 916 at that time and served between April of 44 and September of 45. Now, the only information I could get on it was a couple accidents that it had. And, it's like within 2 days, in one case, it taxied into a fence. And then 2 days later, it went over on its nose. And other than that, I don't know much about its military service. I suspect that it was a navigation trainer, but I don't have any evidence of that. It went through the War Assets Administration and got turned over to the first civilian owner who took it to New Jersey, where it lived for about 8 years and had a couple different owners. Then it was out in the Phoenix, Arizona area for 56 years, and 2 owners out there. One person owned it for 40 years, so quite a time there. While it was in Arizona, it was in a ground loop, and there's actually an NTSB record on this one, landing in California in 1976. The airplane was rebuilt and flew again, and the last annual in the logbooks is 1981, and so it stopped flying about that time. I believe that's probably when it was taken apart to be recovered. They didn't get the job finished, and somebody in Minnesota bought the airplane, and they had it for about a year going to restore it, and then a gentleman down in Florida bought it, and he had it for another 6 years and kind of worked on it. And then I bought it. And so I'm hoping to finish the job. But as you'll see as I go through this, I'm actually starting the job as well.
Did you undo everything that had been done?
Yep. Yeah, we'll kind of get into that here in a minute. Great lead in though. So a friend of mine, Jim Wilkerson, he's in the third picture from the right there. He flew with me down to Florida in December of 2017. And we rented the biggest U-Haul you can get, which is a 26-foot, and proceeded to Central Florida where this gentleman, Ed Copeland, lived. He was an ex-Pan Am pilot, had been a captain on 47s. He was also an A&P. So he was basically, he told me, I'm aging out. I need to pass this on. And of course, we wanted money too, but that's how it goes. Now, loading it into this U-Haul turned out to be a bigger deal than I thought. And, I had moved my Voyager around, and it was no problem for 2 people to pick up a wing and all that kind of stuff. And so we didn't really have anybody except me and Jim, because Ed, he told us ahead of time, he goes, I'm not going to be any help to you in loading. And we got the fuselage in, and we got all the flaps and other stuff that was at Ed's house in. And we broke for lunch, and I thought, well, we're going to be on the road by 3. But turned out that the wings and the engine were in a storage shed that was surrounded by grass, and so there was no solid surface to really work with there. Fortunately, we had some plywood we had picked up, and so we were able to lay that down and to give us a surface. But we had to keep the wings kind of at an angle to get them through the door of the storage shed. And then, trying to get them up into the U-Haul, you had to have them angled again because the opening wasn't big enough to go straight in with them. And so we managed to get them in. The engine itself was really hard to move in that soft area. And so we ended up finally getting it out of the storage shed and then backing the truck underneath it and then, putting it in that way. When we got home to Kansas, we had a lot more help lined up, so the unloading went a whole lot faster. So then it was time to kind of take a first look at what we had. And you can see in the upper left picture here, there's fabric on the wing. And in fact, the far right picture, you can see all the control surfaces are covered too. But there's no silver on any of those control surfaces or the wings. So we didn't know how long that fabric had been exposed to the UV. And so it was like, okay, we're just going to take all this off and then see what we've got, and then we'll put new covering on and go from there. And so that was kind of what we did. We got the covering off, and then in this lower picture, you can see there's a lot of blue tape going on here. And so those are all places that Wade was going through and marking, okay, this needs to be repaired. And in some of the things, you just kind of scratch your head when you see them. Like you can see in the lower left, there was these big dents in the leading edge. And that was the wing that had the covering on it. And you go, who thought this was okay? Now, I don't know, I'm pretty sure we didn't do that in the move, but maybe one of the previous moves had caused that. Who knows? The other thing I'll mention is that the fact that this was a warbird, there's a lot of documentation available. There's structural repair manuals, there's maintenance manuals, parts catalogs, flight manuals, you name it. Plus the Smithsonian has all the drawings for the airplane because it was a warbird. So data is readily available. Parts may not be, but data is. So the first thing we did was kind of focus on the wings, and you can see we've got the fuel tanks out there in the center picture, and as we go through here, you'll see different things that we did because you'll see the contrast between the green primer and the shiny new metal. We ended up having to get a new attached bracket for the left aileron. Looked like the previous one, somebody had backed over it with a truck, and so we got that. So this is an interesting picture from the standpoint that in the upper left here, you can see the spar and how it works. It's actually a V that comes together and then runs on out, and the fuel tank sits inside of that V. And so that's kind of how they did the spar design. So a lot of repairs going on, as you can see in the lower right, or lower left, just to get the structure right. And then the center pictures kind of show some of the things that we're doing to make it easier to maintain. For example, the fuel tank is removable, but in order to remove it, you got to cut the fabric. And so what a lot of people have done is they put in the structure to attach the fabric to, and then they build a metal cover that screws on. So if you need to access the fuel tank, you can remove that cover and easily do it. The flap actuator is pneumatic, and it also occasionally has issues, and so we did the same thing for that, made an access panel for that. So make it easier to maintain. And then lower right is kind of an example. I saw these digital fuel senders that Cease manufactures, and I thought, well, hey, that would be pretty nice to have, And so I contacted them, and they said, yeah, send us your old one, and we'll get an STC and make new ones. And so if anybody needs one, they've got an STC for the V77 for the fuel senders.
You were the first one to do that with it?
I was the first one, yeah. So you'll see a kind of a consistent theme through here, and I've got it kind of highlight in green. So, make it right, make it easier to maintain, and make it better. And so that's kind of the mantra that we followed through this process. The wing structure is basically what I call a stick construction. So back in maybe a decade before this, they would have used wood to kind of build up the rib structures. And on the V77, it's all hollow aluminum tubing that makes up the ribs. And you'll see there's quite a bit of shiny new metal in here. A lot of the ribs were cracked or broken or bent, and so they needed to be fixed. And the way you do that is you cut out the bad section, you get solid aluminum stock, and then you shape it as appropriate, and then you slide it in place and drill it, and then you use these fasteners that Timmerman made back in the day called push nuts, and basically holds it all together. And so that's kind of what happens with the ribs. There's a lot of that going on the right wing. It's also a really big wing to just manhandle. And so Wade got some engine stands from Harbor Freight, and then we kind of repurposed them from engine stands into wing stands with a little extra steel here and there. And so the wing can be rotated completely around now, which will make it really nice when it comes time to do the covering and the rib stitching and all that. Landing light, we made a new bracket for that, and actually by scrounging around on eBay and other places, we found enough parts to make 2 landing lights. So I'm going to have one on the left, one on the right. So and they'll both go down together so that the airplane doesn't start turning because you put the landing light up. So that also acts as a drag brake. Yeah, so. And we weren't just paying attention to the wings only. We actually were looking at the fuselage a little bit as well. Needed a new tail wheel fork, which we found on barnstormers. The tail wheel strut was severely corroded. I showed it to some of the guys yesterday. Those holes go all the way through the metal. And so again, on barnstormers, found one. Somebody decades ago had converted it to a UC-78, which is a bamboo bomber, Cessna bamboo bomber tail strut. So we found one of those. And lower right, you can see it's all cleaned up, ready to go. Lower left here is the window surrounds. They're aluminum, and had taken those to a place in Wichita called Soft Strip that they use baking soda and other really light media to blast the paint off. Upper left or upper right, you can see new Cleveland wheels and brakes that we got for the airplane. Again, making it better. Now the only wood in the airplane is what is around the cabin area, and it's basically for the interior to attach to. And I had this big box of wood that came with the airplane, and so I was kind of looking at it one day and thought, well, okay, I got to figure out where all this goes. And so it wasn't all there, but between the left side and the right side, I had enough that I had a pattern for everything. And so I ended up making all brand new wood for the interior area, and including some sides for the baggage compartment. I'm using this stuff called Coroplast, which is like corrugated cardboard, only it's plastic, and for the sidewall panels and potentially for the ceiling as well. Really cheap stuff, and it's what I got originally from Airtex for my Voyager, so I figured it must be good. So the next step on that is to add the foam and then the leather covering to that. Seats, kind of the same story. We took them apart. It had this really beautiful red velvet covering on there before that we knew we were going to get rid of, but used the old seats as patterns and made new ones, varnished as we went. And of course, as you do all this, sometimes you find cracks and other things that need to be repaired, so we took care of that. The co-pilot seat is kind of interesting. It's actually a turntable seat, so you can take off facing forward and then pull a lever and rotate around in flight and talk to the people in back. And that's a holdover from when it was a warplane, because they used that for the instructor to turn around and talk to the navigation student in the back who was doing this thing. Back seat is shown there in the lower right. The top part of the seat folds forward for access to the baggage compartment. There's no outside door. And speaking of doors, we made brand new doors for the airplane. The old ones were pretty sad looking, but use them as templates. And I'm adding insulation as I go. And then the last part was the doors are kind of wrapped in aluminum once you get all the wood work done. And my friend Jim Wiebe, who lives in the Wichita area, had a nice big bending brake and everything that I was able to use to make those. The instrument panel, I didn't have an instrument panel when I got the airplane. I don't know where it went, but so I knew I needed to make one. I did have a nice big full-size drawing from the Smithsonian that I could use, but I wanted to customize it. And so I went through 2 versions to get what I wanted. You can see version 1 and version 2. And actually I started off with just a big roll of paper that I laid everything out on. And a friend of mine out in the Seattle area, he digitized that drawing, and then they used their CNC router to cut it for me. Then I shipped it to Kansas and went to fit it, and it didn't fit right. Big surprise, right? And so version 2 We lowered the upper edge of the instrument panel so it wouldn't interfere with the windshield. I took out all the mounting holes and just decided I'm just going to back drill those so I get them right. And of course we had to lower a few instruments and then added some holes for enunciators and stuff. I also extended the bottom of the instrument panel so it would cover kind of the cross beams that are part of the instrument left-right connectivity. Then in the right there you can see kind of where I'm at today. This attitude indicator and DG is all paper. You know, that's not the real thing there. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to use G5s or UAvionics AV30s or not. I do have the Garmin 225 radio that's mounted in there sort of today, and I'm considering at this point I'm going to use the GNX 375, which is a combination GPS and transponder with ADS-B in and out capability. So that's the other avionics piece I need to buy. I also went with the Electronic International CGR30C display, so you get all your engine instruments in one spot that way. So it really kind of cleans up the panel for you. The other thing you'll see is I've got a flush-mounted iPad mini there for you know, looking at maps and charts and that kind of stuff. So we spent a lot of time on the right wing, and so now this is last June. Wade was finished with it, and so it was time to haul that back to my hangar and take the left wing over to his place. And he started working on it and found, you know, there's a lot of issues with the center flap hinge support, and the aileron cutout was all cracked and other stuff. And you can see in the lower second picture from the left there, you know, almost all the outboard ribs are gone. We've taken those off and really looking at the structure, and it's pretty obvious that they didn't really repair the ground loop damage correctly. And you know, there's a straight edge on some of those things, and you can see there's just a lot of bow in the spars. So we're going to get a donor wing, and Randy Phillips, the second Randy Phillips, that lives up in Minnesota, has one that I'm going to go up in a couple weeks and pick up and bring home. I've been busy covering control surfaces. I'll talk a little bit about this one in detail, and then we'll just kind of fly through the others. But I'm using the polyfiber method, and I started off using the blanket method where you just kind of wrap the control surface with the fabric. The first thing you got to do is make sure the leading edge is void of any paint, or you've got to put epoxy primer on it. I have done some epoxy primer, especially on controls where there's a combination of steel and aluminum because of the dissimilar metal issue. But you put any chafe tape on all the points where there could be rubbing or sharp points. You wrap the fabric around and you glue it down. You've got to have a certain amount of overlap on the leading edge, and then it's like 2 inches and then 1 inch on all the other sides. And once that's done, then the far right upper picture kind of shows what happens after you shrink it with an iron. So you initially iron it at 250, and then once that's tight, then you go over it at 350, calibrated iron as well. And then it's nice and tight. And then you put on this stuff called reinforcing tapes. You put some chalk lines on so you can keep all your rib stitches nice and lined up. And then you start rib stitching, which was a brand new experience for me because the Voyager doesn't have rib stitching, as you guys know. So that's kind of underway. Once that's done, you put more poly brush on over those reinforcing tapes, and then you start putting what's called the finish tapes on. And you do the ones that go chord-wise first, and then the span-wise ones second. And so, you know, after a long weekend, I had one aileron covered. Now, the flaps were a little different story. They're kind of a weird shape, and they have a double taper going on. You know, they taper both in plan form as well as in thickness. And so you can see my first try is in the trash can there. I got to a certain point, it's like, yeah, this looks like junk. And so I cut it off, watered it up, and threw it away. Called Wade, and he said, okay, let me come over and see what I can do. So he kind of showed me, okay, here's how you should approach it. And we actually got it shrunk and the polybrush on. Now the other thing about the flaps that's different is it's very similar to the wing ribs on the Voyager. It uses PK screws. And so that made life real easy on the flaps once you get the fabric on. And there you can see we're kind of doing the tapes and other stuff going on. The far right, there's a kind of a picture of the trailing edge before and after on one of the flaps. And you can see one of them is really mangled. And so you really wonder, who thought that was ready to cover? So anyway. Elevators, similar story. You take the covering off and you find all kinds of damage that needs to be fixed. In this case, there was a lot of corrosion inside the leading edge, and so we had to make some new ribs and stuff for that. But at this point, I switched over to the envelope method. So the envelope method, as opposed to the blanket method, is more like you're sliding a sock onto the surface, and then you just have one end that's open that you have to glue down, and so it goes a lot faster from that standpoint. Wade was over one night, and I was showing him how good I was at rib stitching, and he was just kind of standing there watching. And then when he got done, he says, "Well," and that's this lower picture right here. He said, "Where's the reinforcing tape? Did you slide that under afterwards?" I go, "Oops." So I had to cut all those out and do that one again. So it just says, hey, take your time, and if you're getting tired, you should probably stop for today and pick it up later. Here's the rudder being worked on. Same issue. We took the fabric off. We found some cracks that hadn't been repaired, and so we did that and then covered it with fabric. Now the horizontal stabilizers were a little different story. Again, they were totally covered, and in the center picture here at the top, you can see the left versus right. And the right one, nice green primer on it. The left one, you can see Bondo all over the place. It had a repair on the spar of it that was really questionable, and the whole thing was kind of bent. So, that just goes to say, the left wing was screwed up in the ground loop, so was the left horizontal. And so it was so bad, in fact, that we got a hold of Randy Phillips again up in Minneapolis and said, hey, do you have one of these spares? He's got a whole hangar full of V77 parts. I don't know if you know that, but yeah. Me and Jody know, yeah. And so I couldn't fit it in my Voyager, so I borrowed Wade's 172, and I flew up there last December and swapped stabilizers and some money, and flew back home with one that was repairable at least. And so Wade went through and repaired that and ready to go. In that lower right, you can see that's Randy standing next to his V77. He's been in the covering process of that and making really good progress. So maybe next year he can fly that here. We'll see. And so once we got the repairs done, this one, you can see I've got the white epoxy primer around all the edges, and then went through the covering process. Now at this point I was starting to get a lot of control surfaces that needed to be stored safely somehow. And so I came up with this idea of using a salt horse, where I drilled holes in it, as you can see in the lower right here. And then I put PVC pipe in those holes, 1/2-inch pipe, and then I put pipe insulation over that. And then I was able to stand the control surface up. And then there's a second salt horse down at the other end, and the surface sets on. And both of those salt horses had padding on them as well, so that no damage can occur. The other thing I do is those surfaces are covered, so no sunlight can get to them. And I've also put aluminum foil over the window that's in that area to keep the UV from being an issue. Vertical tail, it needed repairs. Probably the biggest thing that we did was there was a mount that used to be in the vertical tail for the ADF antenna, so that wasn't needed any longer, so we filled that in. This upper left picture kind of shows the navigation light that's on the tail, very Art Deco looking kind of item. And then it was time to start doing some electrical work, and I put 2 of the 4 One thing I did was I went to a local store that makes rubber stamps and other things like that, and they actually made all these labels for all my light switches, or all my switches and all my circuit breakers. And then I've been doing the intercom wiring primarily. And it's a 5-place intercom, and each position has 4 wires going to it, so there's 20 wires, plus then you got push-to-talk switches and power and ground and all this other stuff going on. So there's a lot of wires running all over the place just for the intercom before you get to the avionics. The other thing that I've tried to do is make it a little bit more professional looking than I did on the Voyager. And so, oops, I've got this lower right here, you can see there's a label maker that can print out little labels that you can wrap around the each wire so you can tell what they are years from now. And then lower left, Debbie's out there helping me test the intercom, and it actually worked the first time. I was kind of surprised, and so there is hope. So where are we at? We've got to finish the left wing. That's probably the biggest slowdown right now, is getting that wrapped up. It's been over at Wade's for over a year now, and it's been kind of stalled out. So that'll get moving again now that we get the donor wing from Randy Phillips here in a few weeks. Then we're going to assemble the airplane and figure out what the control cable links ought to be and get those made and installed. And then there's a lot of plumbing we need to run in the fuselage, the hydraulics and the fuel lines and the pneumatic lines, all that needs to be done. I've got to finish the electrical and the avionics kind of stuff. And then there's some parts obviously left to cover, like the wings and the fuselage. And so get those covered. I got to get the interior finished. I've got all the materials. So like the lower left here shows I bought headliner material and carpet and stuff from Airtex, so that's ready to go. I've got a bunch of leather hides I got from this place called The Yard in Wichita, which has all the stuff that Cessna doesn't use. In fact, it's like it says, this is a Citation Mustang or a CJ2 or whatever, you knew what they were using it for. And so it's basically large scraps. It's like they'll take a whole hide and cut one little thing out of it, and the rest of it gets sacrificed. So anyway, good for me, right? And then I've got the fabric envelopes over there. You can see from, I got those from Preferred Air Parts. So that's ready to go. Engine overhaul is yet to come, and I'm going to have Radial Engines down in Oklahoma do that. They've got kind of a year lead time that they need to do that, and so I'll probably drop that off maybe early in February or March, something like that next year, get that going, and get the prop overhauled too. Then it's basically assemble it, test it, go fly it. Should be simple, right? So the green box up there, our goal is to be at Oshkosh 2023. We'll see. That's the year the airplane turns 80, so that's kind of what's driving that. If it ends up 2024, that's life, And I've got a blog site that you can see down at the bottom there. That blog site has been in existence for about 13 years now, and it chronicled the Voyager restoration and then all the fun we've had since then. And now it's chronicling the V77 restoration as well. So there's probably almost 1,100 posts on there. I try to put a lot of pictures and not a lot of words in there. I get comments from folks that they find it valuable from time to time. So if you have insomnia, that's something to go take a look at. If you want to maybe see what I did in a particular area, so you can maybe apply it to your airplane, check it out. You can contact me by email through that system as well. So, what kind of questions do you guys have? Yes?
I don't see paint on there. You plan to do that yourself?
Yeah, I painted the Voyager myself, and I'm gonna do the V77 myself as well. I think when you read the polyfiber booklet, it talks about nobody's going to care as much as you do about the finish. So if you take it and have it professionally done, they want to get it in and get it out. So that's what I plan to do. I've got to build a monster paint booth, obviously. I was thinking about just turning the whole hangar into a paint booth, and instead of building a box like I did last time for the Voyager, is just put plastic on all the walls, and then then I could paint it all at once, maybe. So
just isolate out the front and the west wife's car.
Exactly. Isolate the wife's car. Yeah, exactly. So, anything else?
You know,
All right.
if you don't know, I'm also restoring a V77 that I think it was next month will be a year. Eddie went down to Lake Charles with me to help get that plane, and we're hoping next year. So we'll see what happens. But there are a few things that I've ran across. I'm trying to, I'm having made. One particular is the yokes, and like some Stinsons, they take and cut the yokes up, you know, and to me they just don't look right. So, and I purchased another V77 for parts, and those yokes were cut as well. And so, well, the bottoms were cut on it, and the tops were cut on the other. So, but I do have the original drawings, and so I have a fab shop that's making them per the original drawings and specs there. So, yeah, they were cut here. This is cut off, and so they were like a somewhat Cessna yoke. But and I've ran into this. Other guys that are restoring some V77s are needing some of these yokes as well. So I should be able to have the first prototypes of those next week, you know, for inspection. And then if that's the case, and everything goes well, we'll have extras made up. And the other is there is absolutely no source for the windshield gaskets that set on top of these tubes here. And so the glass, it actually is 1/4-inch glass that goes in there. And so that gasket, the ones I've got, were not usable, and I know you need some. Well, through actually a friend of Brett's that is in the aircraft industry in Wichita, takes on small projects like that, and we have came up with a mold and several prototypes that we have dialed it in on of which one we'll go to or we'll use, and then they'll be cut to length, you know. So we should have that by the end of October, latest November is the schedule for that. So and I know other guys are needing some. So those are two things that really is needed. Also have an extra set of Cleveland wheels. You know, somebody's needing any, you know, you can see me. They're quite pricey if you have to go buy them. But and right now we're close to starting to hang some fabric on it. So on the fuselage. But the wings that I bought on the other one, that's the ones I'm using because they were near perfect. So next year, Randy, I hope I have a presentation like you got here. But anyhow, yeah, any questions? Okay, appreciate it. Thanks, Randy.